à celles et ceux qui sont hospitalisés dans des conditions souvent difficiles, à ceux qui sont d'une manière ou d'une autre touchés par ce virus. Let me add a personal note for Boris Johnson. All the best in your recovery, Prime Minister. Dans cette période de crise,
in this period of crisis, the energy of governments and European institutions, of course, all the European institutions and institutions in general is focused on a response to the crisis, and that, of course, applies to our institution, the European Commission, and our President, Ursula von der Leyen. Our primary collective responsibility is to contain the virus, to take care of the sick, to look after those caring for them, and also to manage the economic and social consequences of this crisis. That was the objective, of course, of the European Council, which met yesterday and which was chaired by Charles Michel. Lastly, we need to prepare for recovery by drawing all the lessons, and there are many of those, from what we are currently experiencing, both individually and collectively. So these are now the priorities. This is the absolute priority in the current situation. That's why there is a legitimate question, and that is whether the negotiations that we've been dealing with this week with the British side, this has taken up the whole of this week since Monday, every day, might be rather out of phase with what's going on. I even read an article from one of your colleagues describing this negotiation as surreal. I cannot agree with that term, even though I do understand that there is something that's out of kilter here. There are realities, and in terms of those realities, we have to apply realism. That's why it's important that we come together to pursue these negotiations, which are complex and extraordinary. It's often been said they are extraordinarily complex. It is our duty to be realistic in terms of a number of deadlines which are set out in law and which are imposed upon us. The 30th of June, just a few weeks from now, are we going to decide whether or not, before that date, and on the basis of a joint decision with the British, to extend the transition period. This possibility, of course, is provided for in the withdrawal agreement. Second date that we have to look at quite clearly with open eyes is the 31st of December. That is the day set for economic Brexit after political Brexit took place at the beginning of this year. When we come to this economic Brexit, which will bring about important and definitive changes in many areas, will at that stage the UK leave the single market and the customs union with an agreement between it and the European Union, or without an agreement? So what's important here is the number of consequences and the shock that might affect many companies and consumers. And then there's realism within the middle of an economic shock, which is terrible and which is around the corner because of the coronavirus. We need to see whether we can come up with a smart agreement to cushion the shock that I just mentioned, and which at any rate will be linked to the UK exit from the single market and the customs union. And it is realistic to ask that question, to remind you of those deadlines and to come up with responses. Let me add, in parallel to the negotiations, that there's a fourth deadline, the 31st of December, and that is that there has to be an operational implementation of a withdrawal agreement by that date. The withdrawal agreement affects 4.5 million people on both sides, citizens, in terms of their rights being protected. We have a number of commitments we have to respect, and right from the outset, one priority has been priority and stability in Northern Ireland and in Ireland. That's a priority for me. Now, at the time I'm speaking to you, the British government has told us and confirmed at this round that it would reject any extension to the transition period, even though even in the agreement that we struck, this possibility of extension by 1 or 2 years does exist if we decide jointly so to do before the 30th of June this year. We note that choice. My recommendation is therefore that we work seriously between now and the month of June, and as we have to come up with a joint response, we need to think carefully about that response, taking account in the negotiations of the economic situation and the consequences of that decision. In the immediate, the consequence of this decision on the part of the United Kingdom is that time is short. More than ever, the clock is ticking. More than ever. We have 8 months, scarcely 8 months before us to complete 3 areas of work simultaneously. Firstly, we have to ensure that the withdrawal agreement is properly implemented, as I just mentioned. Secondly, we have to prepare for the economic negative consequences at the end of the transition period. There will be consequences, there will be change. Thirdly, we have to negotiate a future partnership and succeed in striking a partnership agreement between the European Union and the United Kingdom, which will make it possible to limit those negative consequences. Ladies and gentlemen, more than ever, we have to start making progress together, and we need to move forward in a constructive fashion. That is why I would point out it is important that this week, without undue delay, we resume those negotiations even at distance. We were able to resume that negotiations thanks to technology. 40 or so video conference calls have taken place this week, and even though it's not the same thing, even though indeed it's easier in a negotiation, it's easier to talk to each other in the wings of a negotiation, and that's not always possible via video. We have nonetheless worked well, and at this stage I'd like to thank the teams on both sides for being available for their constructive work, and I'd like particularly to thank David Frost for his professionalism, his frankness and his determination. On our side, of course, I would like to thank the whole task force team, which is working extremely hard, and I'd also like to thank the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and on her behalf I'd like to thank all the services and all the Directorates General in the Commission which are fully committed, involving the Secretary General, the Cabinet of the President, the Legal Service and the External Action Service. Ladies and gentlemen, the UK has affirmed once again this week its wish to make substantial progress, tangible progress, between now and June. And we're on the same wavelength on this, and we respect the same timetable. That means that we need genuine progress by June if at the end of this year we want to strike an agreement which is commensurate to the level of our economic interdependence and geographical proximity.
On the 18th of March, we sent to the UK a proposal for a full legal text with a view to this ambitious partnership in economic and security areas. The text is available online. It's not always easy to read. It's 350 pages. It's a lot of pages, but it's a complete text, which is the translation, a precise translation of my mandate. Is the legal mandate that the 27 member states, the institutions, the European Parliament set me. This text is a text for negotiation. It's not to be taken or left by the
Even in a short time frame, it is possible to strike a complete agreement and treaty on all the subjects for our future partnership. And on this side, the UK has sent in proposals on certain subjects, not on everything. I simply regret the fact that because of the rule of confidentiality that they have insisted on, we cannot share with you and with member states or the European Parliament this text. We cannot share it with you for the moment.
These last weeks and the preceding weeks have been ways of understanding through technical discussion our respective positions. Now, if we want tangible progress, which is what we want, we have to move beyond that. We have to go beyond clarification stages. We need a more politically dynamic process, generating proposals to build steps towards a compromise and an agreement. For the second round and for future rounds, and in this round, our aim was and will be parallel progress on all subjects, including the most difficult ones in the negotiation. That was my mandate, which the 27 gave me. That is also the requirement of the EP. My responsibility as an EU negotiator is to say the truth to you. Our objective for tangible progress in parallel on all subjects, I'm afraid this has only been partially, very partially met this week. This round enabled us to identify areas where, at least on a technical level, we're getting closer to the UK. However, the UK did not wish to commit seriously on a number of fundamental points. These are not points we just came up with. They are written quite precisely in the political declaration, which is in the withdrawal treaty here, joined to it. It was discussed line by line with Boris Johnson and his team, point by point. It was approved, including by the House of Commons and the EP on our side, when the withdrawal agreement was ratified. What is written in this text needs to be implemented in a serious, objective, legal way in the negotiation. This is not the case now yet in a number of areas. I regret that, and it worries me.
We cannot accept to make selective progress on a limited set of issues only. We need to make progress on all issues in parallel. We need to find solutions on the most difficult topics. The UK cannot refuse to extend the transition and, at the same time, slow down discussions on important areas. There are 4 areas in particular on which the progress this week was disappointing. Number 1, the level playing field. The UK negotiators keep repeating that we are negotiating as sovereign equals. As sovereigns, each side must be able to decide with full sovereignty on the conditions of access to our respective markets. That's fine. But the reality of this negotiation is to find the best possible relationship between a market of 66 million consumers on the one side of the channel and a market of 450 million consumers on the other side. That is the reality. Our free trade agreement with zero tariff, zero quotas on all products would mean unprecedented access for the UK as a third country to this market of 450 million consumers and citizens, and a market that is on the UK's doorstep. Our economic partnership would be broad and comprehensive, encompassing trade in goods and services, including transport, fisheries and energy. Our offer shows the EU's level of ambition, but we must be equally ambitious in guaranteeing high social and high environmental standards. We must be equally ambitious in preventing unfair trade distortions and unjustified competitive advantages, for instance, on state aid and relevant tax measures. This week, the UK failed to engage substantially on these topics. It argued that our positions are too far apart to reach an agreement. It also denounced the basic premise that economic interconnectedness and geographic proximity require robust guarantees. Yet again, this is what we agreed with Boris Johnson in our joint political declaration. This is what the UK Parliament approved after the December elections at the same time that the withdrawal agreement. Let me remind on this point one thing, what I said already, and what my mandate clearly states, ladies and gentlemen, there will be no ambitious trade deal without an ambitious level playing field on open and fair competition. The second point on which we remain very far apart is the overall governance of our future partnership. The EU proposed a single framework for the UK and the EU to manage jointly and efficiently all areas of our future relationship. The UK continues to insist on a number of separate agreements, each with their separate governance arrangements. This leads to duplication, inefficiencies, and a lack of transparency in the application and enforcement of the partnership, which is in nobody's interest. In the single governance framework that we are proposing, there are three important points for us that the UK currently refuses. First, as a basis of our cooperation, we need to refer to common values such as democracy, rule of law and human rights, counter-terrorism, or the fight against climate change as an essential principle. Those values are standard in all our international agreements. Second, our agreements must foresee the UK's continued adherence to the European Convention of Human Rights, which should be given effect in domestic law so that individuals can rely on it. This is particularly important in the field of law enforcement and internal security. Third, the partnership cannot deliver on the high level of ambition expressed in the political declaration without the UK recognising the role of the Court of Justice, the European Court of Justice, when we use concepts of union law, especially for the exchange of personal data. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, this is of particular importance when it comes to our future police and judicial cooperation in criminal matters. And this is our third concern after this second round. We both want a close relationship here, but we face problems. The UK refuses to provide firm guarantees rather than vague principles on fundamental rights and individual freedoms. It insists on lowering current standards and deviating from agreed mechanism of data protection, and this creates serious limitations for our future security partnership. The UK chose to be a third country. It is its choice. As a consequences, it will not be treated as a member state. We must take this fact as our starting point. However, the partnership that we envisage is still unprecedented for a non-Schengen third country that rejects the freedom of people, both due to the number of fields covered and the closeness of cooperation proposed. And finally, we made no progress on fisheries. on this essential topic, the UK has not put forward a legal text. We have made no tangible progress, despite the political declaration stating that we should make our best endeavours to reach an agreement by July. This is necessary to provide sufficient clarity for EU and UK fishermen and also for all business linked to fisheries. Ladies and gentlemen, the EU will not agree to any future economic partnership that does not include a balanced, sustainable and long-term solution on fisheries. That should be crystal clear to the UK. I have spoken several times about June. Why? Because we agreed with Boris Johnson in the political declaration, once again, to hold a high-level conference in June to take stock of our progress in the negotiations. Before that, we have only 2 rounds of negotiations left in the weeks of the 11th of May and the week of the 1st of June. We must use these 2 rounds to make real, tangible progress across all areas, including all those I have just raised. June will be also an occasion to take stock on what real progress the UK has made for the implementation of the Protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. Indeed, with just 8 months to go before the end of the transition period, it is urgent to take the necessary measures for the correct implementation of the withdrawal agreement. The first meeting of the Joint Committee took place on the 30th of March, co-chaired by the Vice President of the Commission, Maroš Šefčovič, and Michael Gove. In follow-up of this meeting, the Specialised Committee on the Protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland, will take place next week on the 30th of April. We need clear evidence that the UK is advancing with the introduction of the agreed customs procedures for goods entering Northern Ireland. We need clear evidence that the UK will be able to carry out all necessary sanitary and phytosanitary controls, as well as other regulatory checks on goods entering Northern Ireland from outside the EU as of January 2021 in 8 months' time. 8 months' time. Indeed, I reminded David Frost again during this round that the phase full of effective implementation of the withdrawal agreement is absolutely central to our ongoing negotiations. This is a line that we will hold together with the Vice President Maroš Šefčovič, in particular on Ireland and Northern Ireland, but also on citizen rights on both sides, obviously. A new partnership with the UK can only be built on trust, and this requires that already agreed commitments are applied correctly. Voilà, mesdames et messieurs.
So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry I took a bit long, but it was an opportunity, when I see you again in this way, to do a full stock take, to do it calmly, frankly, but in a determined way, as we usually have been and will remain to be frank and determined. I spoke frankly of the difficulties ahead, serious difficulties. I still think now that these are difficulties we can get beyond over the coming months if there's political will, if there is realism, and if there is mutual respect. To go back to what I said earlier and where we stand now, I would also add, given today's reality, that the health crisis, the economic and social crisis we're going through now, place upon us even further responsibilities as Europeans and as the UK side, to work together to build a sustainable and ambitious partnership over the coming months. Thank you very much, Mr. Barnier. Now we'll move on to questions.
WebEx, we will operate the same system as we do during midday, so please raise your hand if you have a question, and don't forget to lower your hand again once you have asked your question, just like in real life. And just to remind you, we will have a technical briefing afterwards for any further technical questions. So, if all ready, we will go to the first question. Catherine Fior, you have the floor. Catherine? Okay, Catherine, I think you might be having some IT issues. We will go to Bruno. Bruno, the floor is yours.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you, Bruno.
Yeah, I'd like for Mr. Barnier, you highlighted the areas that are difficult. Among those areas is the area of fisheries. Britain has yet to table any proposals on fisheries, as I understand it, although given the differences it has in other areas. Do you think that it will be possible or impossible to carry on with these talks unless Britain will table some concrete proposals during the course of May?
Bruno,
Well, Bruno, again, I'll try to say this in a very simple way. The UK has decided there will be no extra time for the negotiations. It would be possible. It still is possible. So the 30th of June cut-off date has been imposed. The UK can't do that. It's very tight time. It's exceptional. Never in the history for such important negotiations with any third country have we been under such time pressure. Even a simple trade agreement, and we're going far beyond that. Never before in such a short time. The UK, therefore, cannot impose this short, brief timeline and at the same time not budge, make progress on some topics that are of importance to the EU. Otherwise, one has to be seriously concerned in June as to whether or not the negotiations can have a successful issue. I said again, this is an important matter, fisheries. We expect reasonable proposals from the UK. We await them. The status quo proposal of the EU must be discussed. Fishermen on both sides, for so many economic sectors, this is very important. On the fish processing side as well. It's important for all these stakeholders to have a long-term, durable, equitable arrangement. It'll be hard for both sides, but I believe we can do it. But let me be clear again. To be crystal clear, this balanced, sustainable, long-term agreement on fisheries is an inseparable part of the trade agreement along with the level playing field. Like I said before, you can't separate them out.
Jennifer Rankin from The Guardian.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great, thank you very much. Also on the subject of extension, the British government position is well known. Mr. Barnier, you've mentioned that position, and also you've mentioned on the shortness of the time. So would the EU, in that case, propose an extension to try and change the mind, try and change the opinion of the British government? After all, it's what your colleagues in the European People's Party say is the responsible thing. So should the EU propose an extension?
I've already said this. The President of the Commission has already said that we're not closing the door to an extension of the transition period. It is expressly provided for in the treaty that we ratified with the United Kingdom, and that extension, if we decide on it together, can extend for 1 or 2 years. But for reasons of visibility, so that all the economic players and institutions are aware of this. We have to decide this jointly before the 30th of June. But we've always been open to such an extension. We have to take the decision before the 30th of June. So really it's at that time, Jennifer, that I would respond to your question. Or rather, the European Union would respond. I'd say once again that my recommendation, until such time as the right moment comes up to this question, is that we work seriously between now and June. That will give us time as well to think carefully about any response we should provide. On this issue of extension, I don't think we should end up in a situation where one is asking or another is asking. We shouldn't be asking for this extension. It should be based on a common approach and a common decision. Once again, I think it's too early for us on our side to express a view on this. I will take stock of the situation at the beginning of June.
Next question now, and don't forget that once you take the floor, you're more than welcome to turn on your video. Jim Brunsden.
Yeah, thank you very much. You guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect, thank you. So, on the subject of fisheries, given that this is such a key issue for the EU, what is the point at this stage of going ahead with further negotiating rounds? I mean, if you're in a situation where the EU has said we will not advance on other areas unless this has been addressed, and the UK is refusing to address it, why go on with other rounds at this stage? And also, if the UK isn't bringing proposals, what was discussed during all the sessions on fisheries that were organised this week? Thank you very much.
Jim, je dis à tous ceux d'entre vous qui s'expriment.
Jim, and to all others who are speaking. It would be nice to see your faces. I'm symbolically looking towards an empty chair where I think you'd normally sit, Jim, but it's not the same. Anyway, we're not at the end of negotiations yet. The result or failure will be seen at the end of the process. We can have indications earlier in June, but we still have some time till then before success or failure is manifested. We are not the ones imposing the time constraint either. I've always said, and I'll repeat again, that for me, the quality of the agreement and its globality are more important than the timeline when it comes to agreement with the UK. It's just that right now the UK is saying they don't want to prolong the negotiations. That means we have 2 rounds left between now and June. I hope, and I asked David Frost that, based on our request and our proposal on fisheries, that we receive a reasonable proposal from the UK side on fisheries, and then we can see whether we can try to move closer and find this balanced, sustainable, long-term agreement. I know it's a difficult topic, but this subject is linked and will remain linked to the trade agreement and the level playing field. So everybody has to take their responsibilities here. Thank you.
A second shot, if you want to take the floor.
Nope.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So, Catherine Pure, EU reporter. Michel Barnier, congratulations on your full recovery. It's good to see you back at the podium. My first question would be you said that you'll look at making a decision together. That decision that might be made together at the end of June would include how much the UK would have to continue to contribute to the EU budget. Would you be able to give any sort of reassurance to the British government that they will not have to pay into a massive recovery fund as part of their contribution to an extended transition? And is a question on the level playing field. Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, has pointed out that there is about 1.8 trillion euros being pumped into Europe's economy. That's being done in a very, very uneven way, that is damaging the level playing field. Could the UK turn around and say that the EU is guilty of double standards?
Au moment, Catherine, où nous devrons.
Well, Catherine, when we have to take this decision together as to whether to extend or not the UK's economic presence within the economic frame of the single market and the customs union, if we were to decide together to extend by 1 or 2 years, then there are two issues which you have to address at that point, at least within a matter of days. Firstly, the extension's length, whether it be 1 year or 2 year, and secondly, the budgetary contribution that the UK would have to make to the European Union budget for the period of transition. The UK will no longer participate in the EU budget as of 2021. The agreement is absolutely clear on that, but it has to make a flat rate contribution to the budget during the period where it might remain in the single market for reasons that we'll decide upon together. At any rate, the UK will not participate in the next multi-annual financial framework nor in the next programming period. So it will not participate in plans rolled out after 2021. As I say, once again, it has to pay in a lump sum to the budget if there is a decision to extend the transition period.
I give the floor to Ian Wishart next. You've had your hand up for a while. Ian.
Bonjour, Mr. Barnier. You said very clearly that you have concerns about the implementation of the Northern Irish Protocol. Could you say how far behind you think they are? I mean, have they done anything? And would you accept the pandemic as an excuse for them not living up to their obligations?
Non, mais pour être tout à fait sincère, quand je pose cette question à...
To be very sincere, when I talked to David Frost as negotiator and asked him this question, and during the joint committee meeting a few days ago when Vice President Šefčovič took the floor, it was very clear. He asked Michael Gove, who's in charge of the UK side on this. The replies, though, are bullish, positive, confident, to the to say basically we are going to do what we need to do, in particular regarding Northern Ireland and the protocol of Northern Ireland. However, we can't wait till December to be sure of that. There are dates, there are markers, there are decisions, there are staging posts that need to be seen and taken from a technical standpoint between now and December, where the UK must take the necessary steps for customs checks, for SPS checks, and there's a certain amount in Belfast already at the port and airport for plants and animals from the UK into Northern Ireland within the same United Kingdom, where checks already exist on some products and animals. So it's a question of seeing concrete steps and being kept abreast of concrete provisions, operational provisions that are to be taken. And we need precise answers. We're going through a crisis now in the UK, and here we're in it together. But this crisis, well, it hasn't been mentioned as a reason for any putative delay. I don't think that's on the agenda, and I'm not going to sort of cast aspersions on anyone or say anything other than it's important. We need a climate of trust. Existing agreements, signed agreements, have to be complied with if we want to have good conditions for future agreement. And can you imagine what would happen if there were to be a difficulty in the Northern Ireland issue? It would be very serious for everyone concerned, and we don't want any problems. I've said it here in this room before. I've said it in public. I went to Dungannon, I think, on the 4th of May it's almost to the day from now, and had this meeting, what's often referred to, this meeting with women, very moving, ladies who work on both sides of the border, thanks to European and UK programmes, and I made a personal and political and moral commitment to them. Everything will be done to preserve peace and the conditions of peace in Ireland. The UK and Northern Ireland, of course, will be leaving the single market. The single market has to be complied with as well, and those two things have to work. But I'm not going to, as I say, express doubt about anyone or anything. We have a process. We have June. There's supposed to be a specialised committee meeting at the end of the month on Ireland and Northern Ireland. We need guarantees, we need assurances on all the financial, technical, concrete measures that need to be taken so that the agreement can be properly implemented and applied. And there was a controversy about that. I don't understand why, but I've said before that we would be prepared to have a technical, I stress technical, not diplomatic representation with vets in Belfast, customs experts, a sort of technical office to play our part in that.
Time remaining. Before I give the floor to somebody, can I just remind you to lower your hands again if you no longer have a question? It's just easier for me to read the screen. We will go to Nick Gutteridge, or as I have you in front of me, Nicholas Gutteridge.
Hi, Dan. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Brilliant. Hi, Mr. Barnier. It was sort of to follow up a bit on Bruno and Jim's questions, really, but specifically, UK seems to very much have been prioritising the strand on trade in goods, which you have repeatedly said cannot be separated out from the level playing field issues and the fisheries issues. So if the UK, as you see it, continues to refuse to engage on level playing field and fishing, does there come a point when the EU will look to scale back with talks on trade in goods, which at the moment are one of the issues that's going on every day?
Once again, these three topics are linked, and that's legitimate. The fisheries issue is an economic one, both in terms of fisheries products, fished by extremely brave men and women. I would remind you that this is one of the most dangerous jobs on both sides, of course. And then processed fisheries products as well, and behind that there are industries which are also major. I'm conversant with this industry. I was indeed Minister for Fisheries and the fishing industry in my own country. So this will be a key issue, and it's only natural that it be part of the trade negotiations. And in that, by the way, there is a European Union requirement because of proximity and the economic interconnection between the UK and ourselves to have the level playing field. If I may, let me diverge somewhat and talk about the level playing field. Let me respond to a criticism or some of the comments I've heard, the idea that we want to impose our own legislation on the UK. We respect the UK's sovereignty and we ask it to respect ours. What we're talking about here, if we want to have a zero tariff, a zero quota trade agreement, which is extremely ambitious between the UK, which is on our doorstep and which will remain there, and the European Union with its market of 450 million consumers, if we want to have an ambitious trade agreement, then we have to be certain that this economic relationship will not be accompanied by distortions of competition, aggressive state aid policy. We're not going to ask the UK blindly to follow EU legislation, which it won't be involved in devising with us. All we're asking is that if we're talking about is that we have to come up with a system or an agreement to make sure that our levels of regulation on both sides are more or less comparable, and there should be no distortion of competition in social, economic or taxation fields, including state aids. So we agree that on both sides, within our own sovereignty, we have an equation between our respective regulation on the same level. I said that these three topics are linked. It's as quite simple as that. There will be no trade agreement without an agreement on fisheries. For the moment, the UK has understood our message, and I think quite above and beyond any positions of principle, they will come back with proposals, and we're willing to discuss those on my side in relation with member states and those involved in the fishing industry.
One final question for today, James Crisp.
Thank you, Dan. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. The UK wants a sort of a more basic trade deal than the EU, Mr. Barnier. Are you concerned that that gives the UK leverage? I mean, their model is closer to no deal on your famous staircase than the EU's preferred model. Won't you have to eventually agree a bare bones trade deal to avoid a no deal outcome?
Je suis pas sûr d'avoir.
Well, I'm not sure I fully understood your question, James. A basic agreement, to use your own term, a basic trade agreement, would have to be accompanied by a level playing field agreement and an agreement on fisheries. I and my team, my very competent and brilliant team, and you'll be seeing Clara Martinez, and the other chief negotiators in a wee while for the technical briefing after I go. But all of us want an agreement with the United Kingdom. I weighed my words carefully, and I said at the end of my initial remarks that what's happening around the world in Europe is very serious. In moments of such gravity, we have even more responsibility on our shoulder to find a solution, a way forward. And I think that's how the UK sees it too. Boris Johnson's mind is thinking along similar lines. It's certainly on our mind. Time is short, but I think there is possibility for agreement in that time. We wrote a full agreement out. We think it's possible. The text isn't a take it or leave it text, it's a text for negotiation. But with will, realism, mutual respect, including on fisheries, we can get to an agreement. We're not there yet. We are far from it. We have two more rounds before June. We'll take stock of state of play, and then there's all the other months, July, August, September, October, to work on this. I'm going to put all my energy, all our energy, all my calm as well, all the expertise of the Commission and of Council and Parliament and the Member States at the service of this desire for agreement. But as I said in the plenary meeting with the negotiators earlier today, this agreement will not happen, will never happen, if it damages the European single market. The UK know the rules, the ecosystem. We're not going to damage that. And those conditions, a number of conditions, have to be understood. Leaving the EU, leaving the customs union, leaving the single market. It's a sovereign decision by the UK, but that decision has consequences, and I believe negative consequences. We're trying to limit the negative in this agreement, but we haven't reached agreement yet.
Conclude today's press conference. Thank you, Mr. Barnier, and thank you to all of you who tuned in to today's briefing. Just as a reminder, we will switch over to the off-the-record technical briefing in the next few minutes. Thank you very much.